Thank you for joining us to learn about the Eviction Resolution Program. What you will learn in the next few minutes is what to do when you get an eviction notice, how we can help you negotiate with your landlord, and what other resources are available. Most of you found out about this program after receiving a written notice from your housing provider. That voluntary notice is an invitation to talk about your unpaid rent and other issues that could be putting your housing at risk. This notice is voluntary because it is not until the eviction moratorium ends that you will be required to reach agreement with your housing provider on a plan for settling your unpaid rent. This voluntary notice also encourages you to reach out now for resources that can help you with negotiations, applying for rental assistance, and getting legal advice. If you ask the Dispute Resolution Center for assistance, we can assign a professionally credentialed mediator to start negotiations with your housing provider, even before the moratorium ends. Mediation is confidential, so both you and your housing provider are protected during the negotiation process. The benefit of confidentiality is that ideally it gives you the freedom to share information openly and honestly without the concern of it being used against you in a court proceeding. During the eviction moratorium, negotiating settlement of your unpaid rent is voluntary for both housing provider and tenant. If you still owe rent after the eviction moratorium is lifted and your housing provider wants to start the eviction process, your housing provider is required to serve you with one mandatory written notice that notifies you of the resources available to you, including our program here at the Dispute Resolution Center of King County. The mandatory written notice gives you 14 days to respond. The mandatory notice looks very similar to the voluntary notice you may have received during the eviction moratorium. If you don't respond to this mandatory notice within 14 days, your housing provider can file an eviction proceeding in court. This filing may show up in a tenant screening report if you apply to rent a different property in the future. The next slide will discuss the ways you can respond to this notice. The Dispute Resolution Center of King County would like to emphasize that we are here to serve as a neutral third party to assist you in negotiating with your housing provider. While you will be required to commit to a repayment plan after the eviction moratorium is lifted, that repayment plan must also be reasonable for your individual circumstances. Here at the Dispute Resolution Center of King County, we will work with you and your housing provider to develop a reasonable repayment plan that works for both you and your housing provider. If after the moratorium is lifted, you get one of these mandatory notices and you respond promptly by asking us to schedule a mediation session, your housing provider will be required to participate in mediation. You will both be expected to negotiate in good faith in hopes of settling on a plan based on your individual circumstances. Here's what you can do when you get one of these mandatory notices. You can contact your housing provider and/or your housing provider's attorney. You can contact the Housing Justice Project for legal advice or to ask for an attorney to represent you in a meet and confer negotiation with your housing provider and their attorney. You can also contact the Dispute Resolution Center to ask for help with negotiating with your housing provider. You will find contact details listed on each of these notices for the housing provider and their attorney, as well as the Housing Justice Project, the Dispute Resolution Center, and local providers of rental assistance. At the Dispute Resolution Center, there are 3 options that are available to help you negotiate with your housing provider, either now, during the moratorium, or after the moratorium ends. These options are conflict coaching, conciliation, or mediation. Mediation is also called a facilitated conversation. All of these services are currently free for anyone at risk of eviction in King County. Let's explore each of these three options. The first service we can provide is conflict coaching, which prepares you to negotiate an agreement with your housing provider yourself. Your case manager can help you write proposals and respond with counter proposals if your offers are rejected. The second and most popular option is called conciliation, in which your case manager shuttles back and forth between you and your housing provider, exchanging offers and counteroffers until agreement is hopefully reached. Your case manager will then document the terms and conditions of any agreements you reach. The third and final option is mediation. Let's talk about what that looks like. We can schedule a confidential mediation session for you and your housing provider, hosted by a neutral facilitator via Zoom or three-way telephone conference. A meeting like this gives each of you a chance to discuss a variety of different scenarios and talk about what happens next. This meeting won't necessarily result in a payment plan. However, many of these conversations do result in a written plan of action, which might include working together to apply for rental assistance, how you will keep each other informed about the new developments, and starting to pay rent again, if you can afford it. When your income has stabilized, we can help you negotiate a reasonable payment plan based on your own individual circumstances. If you're not ready to start making payments, a facilitated conversation can reopen the lines of communication with your housing provider. It gives you both a chance to discuss plans for the future. Even if you don't agree on a specific action plan, a facilitated conversation like this can help each of you to better understand the other person's perspective. In fact, you may be pleasantly surprised by what some housing providers are willing to offer. Here are some of the offers which housing providers have made to tenants during the moratorium. In a recent case, the housing provider agreed to sign a new lease without increasing the monthly rent. There have been cases in which the housing provider agreed to a reduction in rent in exchange for services such as maintenance, landscaping, or helping out in the leasing office. Some housing providers have offered to move the tenant into a more affordable unit or one with a washer and dryer. In a few cases, the tenant has realized that it's better for them to move in with relatives or friends to split the cost of rent in shared housing. Some housing providers have offered to let the tenant out of their lease early and waive the early lease termination penalty. Other housing providers have offered to provide temporary storage in a garage for the tenant's belongings or to pay their moving costs if the tenant moves out. In other cases, tenants have asked permission to add another person to the lease so they could share expenses. Discussing your current situation with your housing provider could lead to a plan that works better for everyone. There may be more possibilities than you can imagine. Why now? Some tenants ask us, if there's no obligation during the pandemic to pay rent, why would I want to talk to my housing provider about it now? Why not wait until the eviction moratorium ends and deal with it then? The challenge is that thousands of other tenants will be waiting in the same line to negotiate with your housing provider, and the clock will be ticking. You will have a limited amount of time to negotiate a settlement, so you may feel rushed into an agreement that doesn't satisfy your needs. By taking the initiative to start negotiations now, with our help, you may find yourself in a better negotiating position. Also, because negotiating a payment plan now during the moratorium is completely voluntary, there's no obligation to reach a written settlement. However, if you do reach agreement on a plan, it may give you a sense of closure. If you have a written plan in place when the moratorium ends, you won't have to worry about getting another notice on your door to pay your rental arrears. Don't forget, if you wait to start negotiating with your housing provider until after the moratorium ends and you don't agree on a payment plan, the housing provider has then fulfilled their responsibility and may decide to start legal eviction proceedings in court. Last but not least, requesting mediation can reassure your housing provider, especially if communications have dropped off. Many housing providers tell us, "We're worried because we haven't heard from some of our tenants. We have no idea what their plans are." When tenants ask for our help in arranging a mediation, many housing providers tell us that they see it as a sign of good faith. All of our services are confidential, which means that none of our case managers, mediators, or facilitators can be subpoenaed to testify in court about what we discussed with you or your housing provider. During the moratorium, we keep confidential all our records of contact with you or your housing provider. After the moratorium is lifted, the only information that we will report are whether a written agreement was signed by both the housing provider and the tenant, the names of the people who attended a session that we facilitated, and when we had contact with you or tried to make contact. There are 3 things you can do right away. The first thing you can do is ask your case manager to reach out to your housing provider to find out if they would be open to participating in a facilitated conversation to brainstorm an action plan. Secondly, if you think you would qualify for rental assistance, you can submit an interest form today on the United Way of King County's website. You can click on Get Help, then click on COVID-19 Rental Assistance. From April 26th through May 17th, housing providers who own or manage rental properties in King County completed the application process for rental assistance for their tenants with unpaid rent. Individual households can also enter the tenant pool for rental assistance themselves starting on May 17th. We understand that applications will be prioritized for households earning less than 50% of the area median income. Go to kingcounty.gov, click on Departments, click on Community and Human Services, click on COVID-19 Response, click on Eviction Prevention and Rental Assistance, and then you can click on the ERPP Tenant Portal. We also recommend calling 211 to find out about other sources of rental assistance and whether you're eligible for programs that could help you take care of other basic necessities and more affordable housing. Last but not least, if you don't already have a legal advisor, you can call or email the Housing Justice Project at 206-267-7069. You can also learn more about eviction and the moratorium by reading the frequently asked questions posted on the website www.washingtonlawhelp.org. There you will find clear explanations about your rights and responsibilities as a tenant, both during the moratorium and after it ends. What to do next is up to you. Each person's situation may be different. We suggest weighing the pros and cons of different options before you decide. If you can afford to pay your current rent, Governor Inslee has asked tenants to do so. When to take action is your choice. Some tenants would rather start making payments now to reduce their rental arrears. They would rather not wait to find out whether their application for rental assistance will be approved. If you feel this way, we can help you create a payment plan with a contingency clause that adjusts your payments if your income changes or you become eligible for rental assistance in the future. We hope this has given you an overview of the services we provide here at the Dispute Resolution Center as part of the Eviction Resolution Program. For a copy of the presentation slides or to have a case manager assigned to you, email your request to housing@kcdrc.org and indicate that you have watched this video.